Welcome to UX Oxford this evening. Tonight we've got Chris Baldock from Team Consulting, who's going to share some knowledge about behavioural science. So before that, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Oxford Computer Consulting and Frutos. And thank you also to our co-organisers, Mariana Morris, James Morris and Rachel Curtin, who are online this evening as well. So yeah, we're going to kick off. This is practically our anniversary for the first virtual meeting, I think. For those of you first attending tonight, UX Oxford's been running for about 10 years, but we normally we meet in person at a local venue in Oxford. And we are looking forward to seeing you all face to face again, hopefully in the coming months. And we definitely feel we need to celebrate this 10 years since Mariana set up the meeting. So yeah, so we'll crack on with Chris's presentation. Thanks very much, Chris, for joining us tonight. As you've said, we'll have a little bit of time in between to have a bit of a breakout and chat about some of the ideas that you're presenting. And also, if you want to chat during the session, raise any questions, feel free. You should be able to chat as you go along for people attending tonight. So there's our sponsorship slide. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, thank you very much to our sponsors. And I'll hand over to you, Chris.
Cool. All right. Welcome, everybody. So tonight we're going to learn about behaviour change, how it relates to behaviour science, behavioural design, and a few other bits and bobs. So just to introduce myself, with a great big picture of my face. I am Chris Baldock. I'm a UX design consultant. I've been doing this for just over 10 years. And I've worked with a bunch of big brands, mainly in e-commerce, before switching to medical late last year. So I'm quite a noob to medical. So this is almost like a noob's view of how to apply UX design to medical, digital medical UX. So I work for Team Consulting. So Team Consulting are an award-winning medical design and engineering consultancy. We make a mixture of physical and digital products. We started off as injectors and inhalers, and we're gradually broadening what we do. So just to explain a little bit about the foundations of what we're going to talk about today. This is a quote from Daniel Kahneman, one of the kind of leading lights in behavioral science. So the brain is a machine for jumping to conclusions. It's what it wants to do all the time because it's lazy. The brain barely wants to work. So it just wants to jump to conclusions as much as possible. And you'll see why that matters later on. So, and a quote from yours truly is that you can never force a person to do something they truly don't want to do. I'll caveat that with, I have probably stole that from somewhere, but one of the great things, adages to remember as a UX designer is steal with pride. So what we'll see today, so we've got 3 sections and we'll have a breakout after the first 2. So we'll break out after each one of the first 2 sections. So the first section is the background of behavior change and behavioral science. I'll go into some depth, but it won't be like a university course introduction to behavioral science, so don't worry. Second part is how does behavior change happen in digital systems, mainly focused on e-commerce. So that's what I can talk about, because that's what I worked in for quite a long time. And then the third part is how I see those challenges being applied to healthcare and some suggested solutions using a behavior change framework called COM-B. So we'll start with the background. Oh, first, before I actually carry on, so this event is being recorded. It'll be published on YouTube afterwards. I might have to fly through some of the content. Some of it might be quite technical, depending on your level of experience. Don't worry if you miss something. You'll be able to access the video afterwards and you can reference anything you need to. I'll also be sharing a list of sources that I find really useful afterwards as well. So if you think you've missed a source, don't worry, I'll share that list afterwards as well. Okay, let me carry on. Right, so what is behavioral science? So it's a study of human habits, actions, and intentions, and it's a relatively new field. So whether Influence is the first book written in this field or not is debatable, but you can see it's 1984, so this was starting to be talked about in the 80s. So it's still relatively new, obviously, in the last 40 years. The foundations for behavioral science are in neuroscience. Systems 1 and 2 of the brain is the theory of how the brain operates, created by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, sorry. The main thing to remember, like I said earlier on, is that system 1 of the brain is most of the brain, and that is the thing. It's basically the autonomic part of the brain, and it wants to jump to conclusions quickly. It wants to make decisions quickly. It doesn't want to do a lot of work. It wants to be energy efficient. So that's something to remember because it comes up in what we're going to be talking about. Neuroplasticity. The only reason I put that in here is because you might hear that as people get older, they can't read, they can't learn things like that. It's just nonsense. We have neuroplasticity until our brains stop working. Either we go senile or we die. Our brains can always learn new things given the right circumstances. And then mirror neurons is something that is worth noting. It comes up in a couple of places, and we copy people. So we see people doing something and we copy it, and there's a direct route into the brain, and the neurons basically just instantly map what other people are doing. It's also, we reflect emotions. Like when we see emotions, our brains kind of reflect emotions. It's slightly different to mirror neurons, but it's worth remembering. Okay, so what is behavior change? The practice of identifying which behaviors a person should start, stop, or continue. So continue doesn't sound like a change, but it's worth remembering in that framework. So you want to start, stop, or continue. And there are various models for it. These are the two most popular ones. So the FOG behavior model is used a lot more in e-commerce, banking. Basically, it's quite a common, easy to access framework. I'm not going to talk about FOG today because you can research that online. The FOG website is really good and it explains it quite well. I'm going to talk more about COM-B, which is the framework on the right. You may have seen the COM-B framework reference with a different visual before, like I'll call it an older visual. I'll explain why I'm using this visual a bit later on. So what is the COM-B framework, if you haven't come across it before? It's basically a combination of mapping people's capabilities, so physical or psychological. Can they do something? Do they understand how to do something? The opportunity to, so do they have like the physical opportunity? Are they in a situation where they can do it? And social opportunity, like will it meet their social norms? If we want them to change a behavior, is it acceptable within their group? So healthy eating might not be, for example. They might just be so let's say a bunch of guys who really love chips, and it's not acceptable in a social group to eat anything other than chips. Who knows? And motivation, you can have reflective and automatic. So reflective is when it's a motivation that you think about consciously. So it's a belief that you have, or goals that you're trying to achieve. You have to consciously set the goals in order to meet them. And automatic motivations are things that are kind of built in. So things like impulses and habits are automatic motivations. So what is behavior design? We take elements of behavioral science and we create experiences, products that change behaviors, or we attempt to do this at least. So when we work, when we're trying to change behaviors using behavior design, we tend to work with cognitive biases and heuristics. So heuristics are simple rules of thumb that the brain follows. You may have heard the word heuristics before, as in Nielsen's 10 heuristics. The mental heuristics are different. It's just mental heuristics are very simple rules of thumb that the brain follows, and they can lead to cognitive biases, or you can think of them at the same level. But I like to think of heuristics as something simpler than cognitive biases. And why I've laid it out in this pyramid is I like to think of heuristics as simple rules of thumb that can lead to cognitive biases, and cognitive biases affect behaviors, but heuristics also affect behaviors as well. You can think of it however you like, but just as long as you know that there are two things here that affect behaviors, and that's what we work with in UX design. We all work with these in UX design. So common cognitive biases that it's worth noting in e-commerce. So social proof and the sheep effect. You're viewing a product, this one says like one person watched it in the last 24 hours. It's normally like 12. So this is kind of a social proof that this is a popular product. Oh, this is an attractive product. And also there's a pressure to buy it as well. So it has like a doubly impactful effect in helping someone to buy something. The ambiguity effect is something you want to avoid in e-commerce. So you don't want to leave somebody questioning something really obvious when they're trying to make a purchase decision about something. In this example, this is the Baymard Institute is a really good reference source for e-commerce UX research, and so that's what I'm using for this example. And they're basically saying that if you want people to place an order, then show the shipping cost up front and the details for shipping, like on hover, make them available, and you'll be more likely to make a purchase. And then bounded rationality is we attempt to satisfy. So that's we don't make perfect decisions. We don't want to make perfect decisions because that takes work. We kind of want to make the easiest way to make it's like best, easiest decision. So for example, you're going to order a set of products by featured or recommended or something like that. It's basically a way of Amazon or somebody else saying, we've selected a bunch of products for you. If you trust us as an authority, then you can just look at this set that we've given you and choose one out of this, and that will satisfy probably 80% of people. So that's kind of what bounded rationality is. It's satisfies rather than optimize. So you're not looking for the perfect solution. When we talk about healthcare, it's a very different picture. So we've got things like the lag effect and the spacing effect. So it's all about learning. When we talk about medical behavior change, we're teaching people things that we want them to learn. So the lag effects and spacing effects are very important in learning because basically, what this graph is saying is if you teach someone for an hour, one day, they won't retain the information very well. If you teach someone something 7.5 minutes over 8 days, it has more of an impact. So basically, repeated learning is more impactful, and the space between when you learn is important. So when it says 8 days there, it might not be 8 sequential days. It might be 8 days over a month or something like that. And it's important to remember, depending on what you're trying to teach, it might have a longer or shorter period that you need to give someone. Levels of processing is kind of a multifaceted part. So it's kind of how you remember things. It includes quite a lot of subjects. So using mnemonics to remember things that are complicated. So that's like if you play music, using the every good boy deserves favour as a way of remembering a stave, a musical stave. It's also kind of, you might associate a memory with something else. So it might be easier to remember something to, let's say it's easier to remember something to do like picking up your keys when you go out the door, when you put your keys next to the door. Probably a bad example of that. But one that I quite like is that like memories are retained better when you're in a positive frame of mind while remembering. So this is why this happy lady here, because it's important if you want people to remember something, to kind of help them to be in a positive mindset. And then you've got the Pygmalion and observer expectancy effects. So they're basically, if you give someone the expectation that you expect them to do well, they're more likely to do well. So in this example, I'm showing a driving instructor. People will probably more often pass driving tests if the examiner said, "Okay, I expect you're going to pass today. Let's begin." They probably more likely get a higher pass rate. And cognitive biases in advertising. So we've talked about e-commerce and healthcare, but in advertising it's slightly different, because there's a bit of a mix. So there are good parts. So priming and clustering. Priming is, if you see these like banner ads everywhere, you're primed to buy it. So if you keep seeing it, and you're probably more likely to interact with this website. In this case, Zoopla, because I was looking for a house recently. And then clustering is putting like things next to each other. So it's easier for the brain to understand when things are clustered. Not so great are, well, it's a combination of the Baader-Meinhof principle and the fundamental attribution bias. So the Baader-Meinhof principle is, if you buy, the example is, if you buy a red BMW, suddenly you start seeing red BMWs everywhere, and you think, my God, everyone's got a red BMW. Nothing's changed. It's the same amount of people as you has had red BMWs in the first place. You haven't joined some new club that has just popped up out of nowhere. And a fundamental attribution bias is when you attribute the wrong cause to something. So how these combine in advertising is people tend to think that devices are listening to them all the time. Most of the time they're not. It's just we're actually so predictable as humans that our behaviors can be grouped with other people quite easily. And so we think advertisers are either reading our minds or listening to what we're saying, and it's not. It's just like we've done something that just has a really predictable set of actions that other people are also doing surrounding it, and we see relevant adverts. But maybe Amazon and Google are listening, but it's more likely we're just doing something really predictable. And that's a fundamental attribution bias, when you think that you've got these demonic tech overlords watching us, when it's just humans are really boringly samey as each other. I've put in a comical cognitive bias. It's like it's up to you to decide whether it's comical. So there's a bias called sexual overperception bias. This is a real documented thing. Men always think women are flirting with them. If you're a man, watch out for it. If you're a woman, watch out for it. It's something to remember. It came up when I was researching this, and I thought it was worth pointing out. And then one last point in this section: what happens when cognitive biases go wrong? So why I'm referencing this here is because I'll talk about YouTube. So YouTube is a digital solution that was created to share videos. So people could make videos, share videos. And unfortunately, because of how their algorithm works, you have an echo chamber effect, which everyone's probably heard about, because Facebook was a victim of it with various elections. Like the echo chamber effect of Facebook influenced elections. It's kind of made people more right-wing and left-wing, things like that. Unfortunately, what happens on YouTube is somebody's a bit susceptible to this. So they've got the ambiguity effect, so an illusionary of explanatory depth, the two cognitive biases that combine to basically create this strange mindset with people where they can't quite understand the planet that they're on. Like because our brains aren't really built to conceive large numbers, or the fact that we're on this huge ball that we can't see the edge of. So it just kind of fundamentally confuses some people. And they'll watch a couple of YouTube videos that kind of skirt around the edges, and then unfortunately the algorithm makes them watch more of these videos, and then lo and behold, 20 videos later, you've got a flat earther. And that's because YouTube hasn't taken into account the fact that they are influencing people's cognitive biases. So one thing to be aware of as UX designers is we're working with cognitive biases. Don't mess it up. And yeah, just remember that. But in most of the things that we do, we're not going to have as much influence as someone like YouTube. So don't worry about it too much. All right, so this is it, end of this section, and we're going to have a little breakout unless there are any immediate questions. And if we're going into the breakout now, I just want you to think about fundamental attribution error. So it's assigning the wrong cause to something that you've experienced. So the example of this classic one is you go to a party and you meet Steve. Steve seems really rude and curt with you, and you think, oh, Steve is a rude and curt person, but he's probably just having a bad day. He might have had some bad news. He might have lost his job. He might be a nice person, but that's called a fundamental attribution error, thinking that Steve is rude all the time when like almost nobody is rude all the time. So if we have a breakout now or questions now, we can discuss or we can take questions.
Yep. Okay. Sorry, I was battling with my mute thing there. I'll create the breakout room. Just 2 or 3 minutes, is it, Chris?
Yeah, 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
Are we all back now? Oh.
I think so.
Okay. I will share. Okay, is it sharing okay again?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Cool. So, thank you. Hope everyone had a chance to say a few words to each other. It's okay if you didn't get into a deep discussion about cognitive biases. It's fine. We're all peers. We love talking to each other. So don't worry if you didn't get too deep into the subject or anything. All right. So second part is how does behavior change happen in digital systems? This section is mainly focused on e-commerce, and the section after it will focus on healthcare, just in case if anyone's wondering where health is going to come into it. But you'll see why I focus on e-commerce first. So I'll explain something first of all, which is the Rubicon model. So this is a behavior change model, and it's a very simplistic model. And it basically applies to pretty much any e-commerce transaction. So what is the Rubicon? So the Rubicon can be thought of as the point of no return, or making a decision to act. So you have a phase before you decide to act, which is considering. So like, do I need to act? Do I need a new TV? Do I need a washing machine? Do I really need a bike? And then you decide, yes, I actually do. So then you'll be planning it. So you'll be researching which one to get. Then you act, like you make a purchase, and then after the purchase, you assess your purchase by using a product normally or using a service. So how this then breaks down into a normal e-commerce like linear buying journey is like this. So there's not like a one-to-one mapping. It's kind of you have bits and pieces that overlap, say 2 parts. But I can talk about each of these points as we go. So entry is part of the consideration period. And this is basically when somebody's entering your website or app. And how to handle that entry well, there's a few ways of doing it. So Pinterest, but if you're already logged in, basically by the pattern of the UI, the fact that it's broken, it encourages you to scroll. So that means you're going to stick around, and you're more likely to use more of the service if you stick around. So you're going to get more value out of interest. You're going to invest in the service by like saving things, and all because they've got this broken UI essentially. So it's a good pattern for what they do. Airbnb, on the other hand, have a completely different approach. So they're basically saying, as soon as you land there, we're selling you a lifestyle. This is the lifestyle that you'd like to be. So you've got a huge attractive picture, people in a forest, young, relaxed looking family. And they also have a nice little thing. So if you go on Airbnb and you resize the browser, you'll see that much like Pinterest, they try and encourage scrolling by making sure that the black area doesn't fill the full height of your browser window, and that you can still see this explore nearby thing below, so that you know that you can scroll. And that means that you don't just see the top and think, is this all I can do? You can scroll and explore a little bit. So it's a little subtle thing that they do. So a little steps in order to enable people to carry on browsing and stick on the site. So we'll talk about the planning period next. So when browsing and choosing, so the ASOS app is a product that I designed a few years ago, and there's a couple of like behavioral design points here. So the first one is using visual navigation. It's something I had to push them to do because they wanted to release a version without it. And the reason I wanted to push a visual navigation, as in using pictures when you're navigating to products, is because the brain processes images 60,000 times faster than it processes words. So basically, people don't really have to think very hard when they're looking at this, and they should be able to just navigate to a relevant section. And when they're in that section, obviously their brains haven't been overloaded with anything, they're in a better frame of mind, they're more likely to carry on, and that's what you want. And then on the right hand side, we can see a product detail page. In this example, there was two things I wanted to do. One of them was the kind of like keep it clean. So the product was a focus, the product was a focal point. And we also wanted to move the add to bag button off the page. Now, this is something that was really controversial because based on how desktop websites were designed, you always have to have a call to action visible. On mobile, it's not the case. People scroll, whatever you do. So there was an issue that we had at ASOS where basically when people add to basket, they're using a basket as a shortlist or add to bag, using a bag as a shortlist. And that takes stock out of the availability pool for everybody else. It was a real problem. It was basically making it so half the stock on the site wasn't available for people when people were just making shortlists and they weren't going to buy it. So we wanted to promote the save for later action instead, because save for later, we already knew from the data that there was a good correlation between people who use save for later and being retained customers and making purchases. So we promoted it, and it had great results. It increased sales, even if you couldn't see a great big green button on the page. So we were happy with this, and we changed the behavior in the app. Okay. So then we've got the assessment period. So this would be after you've made a purchase and you're kind of in the delivery phase. And what this graph is the blue part is when a buying journey goes well, goes great. So somebody's making a purchase, they're excited to make the purchase when they make it. They've seen just the right messaging and they've been communicated to in just the right way, and the excitement is building until they receive the product, they get the product, it's all great. And then the excitement tails off a little bit because they've got the product now. They're not anticipating it, they're using it, but they're still in a positive frame of mind. The red line is what you want to avoid. So if you don't communicate properly after somebody places an order, if the delivery messes up, let's say packaging is damaged or something like that. If you don't handle that part of the journey well, then you've got this like risk of return. So it's a risk of returning a product, but it's also a risk of like the customer not returning if you mess up at that part. And it's really critical to get right. One of the people who handle that really well is delivery. So they basically over communicate. You place an order, and this is something that Just Eat didn't used to do very well. It was all really ambiguous. You place your order and an hour later it might turn up or it might not. Delivery worked out that this is a problem. So they over communicate. They literally tell you exactly where your driver is, exactly what's happening with your order. And it's a way of keeping that curve in the blue rather than it going into the red in disappointment, because an order might take an hour to get to you. You're hungry already. Like it's a risky period. Like you're making people wait while they're hungry. So Deliveroo handle it really well, and they're a successful company. But when you're trying to influence behaviors, you obviously have dark patterns. I know many people will have learned about UX dark patterns before, so I won't go into too much detail. But it's just worth remembering that we do have a responsibility, an ethical responsibility, even like in e-commerce and insurance and booking flights and things like that. We're not supposed to design something that deceives people. So thankfully, the two examples on the right, we're not allowed to do this anymore, even if we want to, because of GDPR. Thank you, legislation. There's one good part of it. Obviously, nobody likes the cookie messages, but that's different anyway. But GDPR makes it so that you can't do this anymore. And Ryanair are just my favorite dark pattern enthusiast. They're my favorite dark pattern enthusiasts. They do as many as possible. It's almost like a competition, like how many can they put into a booking experience. And it's a competition for you then when booking a flight via Ryanair to get to the end of the booking process not having spent more money than you thought you were going to in the first place. And this one's particularly great. The only way to choose to not have insurance is to choose the country of don't insure me. Wonderful. Little known country in the middle of Europe. And then obviously when I talk about having a responsibility when you make a design, sometimes people just make ridiculous decisions. So in this example, somebody's probably received a message or an email saying, set up your Yahoo account recovery details to not get locked out of your account. This is really critical stuff. Like, if you don't have a way of not getting locked out of your account, you might not be able to get access, and you might be using this email to log into a bank or and all kinds of different services. You don't want to distract people from this action. But somebody had a bright idea to put an ad in here to try and monetize quite a critical page, and the ad distracts from the action. You wouldn't do this. So this you could count this as a dark pattern or a done pattern. It's something you don't want to do, but it influences behavior because you want people to do the thing on the right, and they're probably going to do the thing on the left. And just one more thing to think about when thinking about behavior or psychology, where it gets plugged into UX design. This is something I've been passionate about for a while. It's a little bugbear, but there's a thing called the rule of 7 in psychology, and it's just based on this like memory game. When you're shown a tray of things for 5 seconds, most people remember 7, and it's a bell curve. So some people remember 5, some people remember 9, 10. But the general rule is it's like 7 plus R2 items. But this has been misapplied in UX thinking for years. So to website navigation. So I heard so many times that oh, you need to use a rule of 7 with your website navigation. Don't have more than 7 categories, because people need to keep something in the active working memory. It's nonsense. They can see these links on mobile. As long as they know how a menu works, then they can open the menu and see the links. They don't need to keep the entire structure of a website in their active working memory. So why I'm talking about this is, it's just one thing to be wary of, is not using pop psychology in UX. It's just remembering what we talked about earlier, cognitive biases, and we'll see maybe a little bit more of that later. But using cognitive biases and heuristics, that's what we work with in UX. We don't work with old psychological principles that are misapplied to UX. So that's just worth remembering. All right, so second breakout for everybody. Have you seen any particular UX dark patterns that you'd like to talk about? So we're going to break out into groups, and we can all talk about them together, create our own little evil empires, and hatch some nefarious schemes to deceive people. Just as a fun little exercise. So yeah, we'll break out into groups again and do that.
Okay, thanks, Chris. We'll just do 3 minutes. Time's marching on. Okay, opening the rooms now. Thank you. Pretty much should be everyone back now, Chris. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. I'm doing my best to get through this as quick as possible. And you're happy to know we're on the final section now. So in the final straight. And we're going to talk about the challenge in healthcare, and then we're going to see some wild and wacky solutions that have come from a combination of my brain and ComB and some UX practices that are generally used in what we design. So after you've been talking about all these dark patterns and hatched these various schemes, we're immediately going to switch to the main point of medical UX design, which is don't cause harm. So dark patterns are something you definitely wouldn't be using in medical design, medical UX design, because it's all about risk mitigation first, and then we want to create delightful experiences in medical, just like we're doing anything else. Like a patient or somebody receiving care doesn't want a rubbish experience on their phone or on their computer. They want it to be just like any other product. But it's important that we don't cause harm, and there are certain hoops that we have to jump through in order to do that. We're not going to explain those today. We're not going to talk about those today. But we're going to talk about how to use a behavior change framework. So the first thing to remember is, so the Rubicon model that we talked about for e-commerce, we can't use in health behavior change. The model for behavior change doesn't work because the Rubicon model is good for trying to convince someone to buy a fridge. So it's like an easy, tangible goal where you've got a simple linear path to having the satisfaction of having a fridge. If you're trying to get someone to improve their overall health outcomes, that's just like a long-term ambiguous goal. It's much more complicated, and you need to use a different method of behavior change. So that's why the ComB framework comes in, which I referenced earlier on. And how this essentially works is you need to have all of the 3 coloured points available. You need to be working with all of those in order to influence a behaviour or to change a behaviour. So you need somebody to have the capability, you need someone to have the motivation, and you need someone to have the opportunity. And obviously it helps to be backed up by theory. So this wheel that I'm showing here will look, if anyone's seen ComB before, this wheel that you'll see here will look different to what you've seen before. So the wheel looks like this normally, this almost like a dartboard. And the wheel that you can see here has something called the theoretical domains framework integrated into it. So that means that there's a little bit more theory behind the ComB behavioral model, which is already quite theoretically strong anyway. And that's why I'm using this, because it's kind of a more modern and extended version of the ComB framework. So that's why I'm using this color wheel, and I find it easier to reference because it has these I find it quite easy to latch on 2 points. So like in psychological capability, you're talking about knowledge, memory, attention. Like I'm used to using things like attention in UX design. So this is something I can reference quite easily. And just so you know, most of what you're going to see in the next part, these are my 2 main sources of information to kind of like back up what I'm talking about. So there's a book called Health Behavior Change, quite a technical, slightly sciencey book, but it has a reference chart in it. There's a bunch of meta studies that basically say which interventions work for which condition. It's not exhaustive, it doesn't cover everything in the world, but I found it really useful just to create some examples here. And then the behavior change wheel, which is the ComB system that I've been referencing throughout. This book explains how to do that. And if you actually want to create a brand new health behavior change, maybe create a large program of behavior change, then you follow the ComB process. But what I'm just going to talk about here is a bit of a shortcut. If you kind of know what influences behaviors already, so let's say you're using the reference chart that I talked about in health behavior change, you don't have to go through the whole process, but obviously I would advise going through the process and reading the book to understand what's going on. So challenge 1, prevent an ex-smoker from relapsing. So what I will use here is the COM-B framework on the left, and I'm going to use certain points from there. These points are essentially, what I did was I looked at treatments that work and then how they can be broken down into the COM-B points. And the reason I do that is because when I look at the COM-B points like memory, environmental context, it gives me kind of a broad enough base to kind of diverge on. So that's why I find it helpful to just reference it like this. And then UX design techniques on the right are simple ones that I've just chosen for this method. So in this example, I've designed an email. So things like the 5-second rule are important. The 5-second rule is a bit of a, it's not super scientifically defensible, but if you just remember that you've basically got 5 seconds to make somebody understand what they're looking at on a website, email, app, any kind of digital interface. If it takes longer than 5 seconds to understand it, then people are going to desert because it's too complicated for them to understand. And then you've got like a clear call to action is like super important in an email. It's amazing how many people miss it. So in this example, we've got an email from the smoking cessation service, helping people stay healthy, and they've sent an email to Alan. And Alan, congratulations, Alan, he's gone 6 months without smoking. We're asking him to give himself a high five, but obviously somebody else can give him a high five as well, as evidenced in this picture of the smiling man. So I mentioned mirror neurons earlier. So when you see somebody smiling in a picture on a website, app, email, we smile inside. We either smile directly or we smile inside. It creates a positive feeling in us. So this is why so many websites use these like pictures of smiling images. And it also helps if the people are looking at you as well, because our brains get tricked into thinking you're actually looking at a real person. But in this example, we're trying to say encourage like a healthy behavior. So it's like, yeah, great, you can go to the gym and high five people. So as a treat for the fact that he's achieved this 6 months no smoking, we're giving him a 25 quid voucher to use at a local sports centre so he can go play squash with his mates or do something else. And rewards like this are like defensible. They're proven to work. So you're not just giving people 20 quid for completing 6 months non-smoking. You're saying, we'll give you a voucher off something that will make your behavior stick, and it'll also give you something fun to do and something healthy to do. So there's a bunch of reasons why this works. When we talk about framing, so there's a couple of ways to think about framing. So the content below, why is sport good for you, frames the call to action above. So it makes it more defensible. But they're framed with each other as well. So it's supposed to tell a story that it's important to care for your cardiovascular health. So go and do some sports. You can meet new people and new friends, because the identity of an ex-smoker, like I'm a non-smoker now, is very important. And reinforcing that identity is also a point that really works in interventions to keep people not smoking. And then getting someone to challenge themselves. This isn't the best way of doing this. I'm sure any of the other UX designers in the room could think of another way of doing this, but that's essentially using the observer expectancy effect. So if you tell someone that to challenge themselves, like you believe in that, I think if you do this challenge, you'll be able to complete it. It's positive and it works. So it's a behavior change method that would work in this case as well. So second point, helping a patient to manage their IBS. So we're going to use some different COM-B points this time, slightly simpler. Ones we'll probably focus on the most will be social support in this example. And with regards to UX design, removing barriers is the key one. So this is an app that actually exists. This is an app called Ondive that I was researching as part of another project that we're working on with a client. And you can see it's quite a technical looking app. It's just kind of a graph, and you think to yourself immediately that why would anyone treating a condition like a patient like want to see just a graph in an app? It's not only is it's not very engaging, it's kind of technical looking. It's not a very enjoyable thing to experience every day. But if for some reason this might be attached to a treatment, there might be a theory behind it, you might have to stick with this, but there are things you can do to work around it. So adding a tab bar. So rather than using this grey menu at the top where you basically, you're not going to see that grey menu button at the top, you can put a tab bar in that lets people explore the sections of the app much more easily. And the reason I'm talking about the tab bar is because of the thing on the right, but I'll come to that in a minute. Also, when we're using attention, so giving someone like a better capability by drawing their attention to something, you can see the button on the left, the main call to action, is white on a grey background. I know it's got a red rim around it, but obviously make it solid red and it's just it's much easier. Also, you could add a voice input. So rather than having somebody adds a meal, they have to search for each item, they just speak the meal, and then a machine learning system or AI works out what they've said and then sends it back to the app and just says, here was your meal, here were the different points in the meal. So it gives them an easier way of doing it. It gives them more capability. So if they want to change the behavior of recording what they ate more often, then it lets them do it. Then on the right, we can see a section. The advice section is entirely dedicated to social support, because we know that works for this treatment. Like social support and empathy work for IBS sufferers. So you've got a support group with some lovely famous people in it. You're very lucky that you've got Sean Bean, Prince William and Mary Berry there, and you can chat with them now. So if you really need support, you're having a really rubbish day, you can just chat with them and one of them might reply to you. And also stories from the community where the stories have been written in an empathic way for you. So you don't feel like you're suffering alone. And this is proven to like really help the outcomes and mood of IBS sufferers. So that's kind of why this section is here. And this section and the voice input are essentially the only things that I've added here. So this is a small change to an existing app that could potentially have a big impact. Obviously, I've not tested this, but that's the reasoning behind it. So challenge 3, helping this type 2 diabetic to maintain better glucose control. So in this example, we're going to focus on past success and goals. So focusing on goals is something that can be applied to a lot of healthcare situations and behavior change interventions. But it seems to be particularly effective with type 2 diabetics. And the 2 UX design techniques I'll just talk about here a little bit are personalization and progressive disclosure. So the solution here, apologies for the color scheme. I just thought I'd inject a bit of color at this point in the proceedings. So first example we'll talk about progressive disclosure is, you remember the Ondive app that we just saw a minute ago? You see a graph immediately. A lot of medical apps are like that. It's arguable that somebody wouldn't want to see a graph immediately. They might just want to see what their goal is. So it might be scary to look at like their progress constantly, like straight away. I don't know though. But this is just one solution. And anyone else could have come up with a number of solutions for this. But in this example, we're using progressive disclosure, so they can view their progress. And that's the screen on the right, and they can see their target of steps per week 50,000. They've met it on 2 of the weeks, so we're a bit behind on week 2. That's okay, because our average is 52.5 thousand over those 3 weeks. And if they stay on target this week, then they'll hit their goal by the end of the month. Great. And we haven't shocked them with a graph straight away on the first screen. You'll also see there's social support again, but in a slightly different way. So because we like to reciprocate. So basically, when people give us gifts, we like to reciprocate. But also when people give us help, we like to reciprocate. And also, same in this example, this is a reciprocation of help. So we've got this social group where people are helping each other. So they might need a helping hand every now and again, or a bit of a prompt or a push, and it helps that is coming from your social group, because you trust these people. And like if somebody says, "Come on, you can do it," from your group, then it's a good little pick me up, and you feel supported. So this kind of like social support, like, is a method of helping this outcome for type 2 diabetes. So challenge 4. So this is something that was worked on at team. I'll caveat that with this picture of an inhaler, capsule inhaler, was something that I had to just take off the internet. This isn't the product that we worked on. There was a confidentiality with the client for the actual product that we worked on. So this isn't the actual one. Just so you know what a capsule inhaler is, though, because I didn't know what one of these was before I started working at team. And it's something where you put a capsule in it, you close it, and it pierces the capsule, and you breathe in the powder, essentially, that's in the capsule. So in this example, it's basically trying to make it easier to use, or make sure people use the inhaler every day if it's like an everyday treatment, so improving adherence. And we can apply the COM-B framework to this, so using attention and reinforcement, and then UX design techniques that I'll talk about are kind of like feedback loop and sequencing key ones here. So this isn't a digital product, this is a physical product. So I just thought I'd throw one in just for randomity. So this is a packaging design, and I expect that these blister packs were probably just like a plain blister before, but it's been designed now so it's got the days of the week on. So there's a feedback loop. So when you've taken it, you know you've taken it for the day. So it's like, great, I've taken today's thing. So it's kind of helping you to memorize what you've taken, because you might not know whether you've taken it today or not if you don't put the days on. And then sequencing, as in, because it's the days of the week, it's like we like to follow sequences. It's easy for our brain to do that. So it's kind of reducing a bit of cognitive load, making it easy for the system one. So that's kind of how that works. And then goal completion is like, yeah, you want to take each one for all of the days. If you miss a day, you've almost like missed your goal. So you'd be sad. You wouldn't want to do that. So that's how this kind of would work with the COM-B framework. So to conclude, those books on the left are useful. Those cognitive biases on the right are really great. So the Decision Lab is a website that I go back to reference quite often for cognitive biases. They're all listed on there. You can get used to them just by reading that. There's quite a bit of detail for each one. So don't kill yourself by trying to read them all at once. Just maybe read a few of them, look at a couple of interesting ones, get used to them if you don't use them before. One thing to think about is, even though I've talked about a lot of things, a lot of different details, we all know this, like as UX designers, we all know this process, the double diamond. And all the information that I've talked about today is information that just gets dropped in to different parts of the process. So in the discovery and definition phase, you can use something like the COM-B framework to basically like open up the space, see which solutions or treatments are available, and then when you're designing, you're also using it to see like which ones were effective in the past, or which solutions make the most sense. So it doesn't alter the normal design process, it's just an extra input. to add to the inputs that we already have. So don't worry, it might seem complicated if you haven't looked at any of this stuff before. Sorry if I'm sounding patronizing, I'm not meant to be. But just take little steps. You don't have to design a whole system. You can just, like you've seen here, you can just design an email or a section of an app or something like that. And you can make big changes in people's lives. Okay, thanks, bye.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Chris. That's a lot of information and really, really interesting. So thanks very much. I'm waiting for some questions to come up here from any of our participants on Zoom. If you want to pop them in the chat. I was curious, Chris, actually about COVID. You must just see opportunities for behavioural change and using behavioural science just all day, every day at the moment. And a lot of missed opportunities, I think.
Yeah, this one that we can't really talk about as a company, unfortunately. But one that I can talk about personally, though, which is the government's messaging of COVID. There are ways to improve it. So we learned in World War II that basically, like, positive re-encouragement, storytelling, framing, things like there are many examples of this done well, where we weren't ordering people to do stuff, and we were showing they were kind of like fun drawings of people, and you can empathize with them, and it's much easier to understand. Whereas admittedly, the government have obviously taken the pandemic really seriously, and so that comes through in the messaging, but it's the subtlety of communicating that has maybe been a little bit lost. But obviously, we've never handled a pandemic like this before, so I do give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt and leeway with it. It's but it's just the fact that we already did it right in the past that kind of gets me a little bit. In the World War II, we got this right. When we wanted the public to do something, we got it right, and we influenced people's behaviours positively.
Maybe it's too much of a sort of reflex, a knee-jerk reaction, rather than sort of sit down and think calmly and use the expertise that's available to them. You just couldn't feel like they maybe didn't talk to enough behavioural scientists, perhaps.
Yes, possibly none.
Yeah. So any other questions coming from the team? Get some. That was excellent. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Molly.
No, all quiet. Okay, well, on that basis, perhaps if everyone's quiet there, well, thank you very, very much, because you get some sleep back. Grace, that's been a long day. I really appreciate that, for putting so much time into the presentation. And as you say, we'll be able to share that online. And I'm sure, I think a lot of people want to go back to some of those themes, because there's a lot of content there, and it's really, really useful, depending on the different things you're doing.
Yeah, I'll add a list of resources that I talked about as well, so I can share that with you, and then we can put that on YouTube, I expect.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I was wondering, actually, in regard to sort of regulatory application of any of this material for app design in particular, and health apps. I appreciate some of the things you were talking about there were more related to sort of health promotion, but have you got any good references in relation to dealing with the regulators in this respect?
Well, this is where it gets a bit tricky. So yes, I can share what we use at Team, but it's basically just kind of saying, here is the IEC 62304 regulations, that kind of thing, and like adhering to them. Like, a lot of it is mainly for developers to take into account. So
yeah,
it's more about making sure they've documented their code properly, and then if you use something like COM-B in the theoretical domains framework, then you have a theoretical basis for any behavior change that you might want to make. So it's more likely to be approved, and obviously the risk mitigation processes that we go through with human factors, they're more likely to be catered for if you've applied the theory in the right way in the first place. But obviously everything still has to go through the same processes, because we don't have pre-approval from the FDA or anything like that yet. So yeah, this is still, but I can share a couple of sources related to that as well in the list that I'll send over.
Yeah, fabulous. Right, thank you. Okay, we're getting lots of thank yous and interesting, and thank you very much, Chris. And not so many questions. Really insightful. Yeah, excellent. So I think perhaps we should wrap up. Yeah, people looking out for that reading list. Yeah. So I'm gonna wrap up the session then. But thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate your time and expertise. That was excellent.
Thank you.
And I'm going to just want to share my screen now, if I may. So yeah, I just wanted to wrap up there by thanking the co-organisers, Mariana, James and Rachel tonight. And also thank you very much to our UX Oxford sponsors, Oxford Computer Consultants and Fruto UX Design Studio. So that's it for tonight, and thanks very much. We'll see you next month, and thanks again, Chris.
Thank you everyone.
And good night.
And good night.
Good night, everyone.